Call this budget committee to order, please. Good afternoon, and to those in the audience, I apologize for the late start. We had some matters that we needed to deal with prior to the meeting today. So to get started, we have the declaration of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, thank you. Opening remarks, Mr. Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I've got a couple slides. I'll try to go through these really quickly. Some of these you've seen before because I'm basically going to reflect my opening comments at our very first budget meeting. So in our 2020 budget, there's a number of challenges, base budget pressures, and I'm going to focus on the last two. Infrastructure funding for both what we have and infrastructure expansion, as well as service expansions. And I think one of the challenges facing the whole organization, staff and council, is how do we find the right balance between looking after what we have at the same time as we're investing in program and service expansion. And those two things together are putting a lot of pressure on our budget. And I think that's probably some of the discussion that you're likely to have today, is how do you find the right balance between those. So in terms of infrastructure funding, you've seen this before. One of our challenges as a community is we've got dual challenge of looking after our aging existing infrastructure and the challenge of building new infrastructure to support growth. Not all communities have that. We've got that dual challenge. And I just want to point you to the last bullet on the light blue, the existing. We've got an annual funding gap of something like $30 to $40 million per year in underinvestment in state of good repair. Craig's presented all those details, but I just want you to remember we've got billions of dollars worth of infrastructure and not enough capacity in our annual budgets to look after the infrastructure that we've got. And at the same time, we've got master plans that are trying to deal with service expansions in a number of areas. All the demands, paramedic services, GRT service expansion, mobility plus, housing. It's a pretty long list of service expansion needs driven by growing community, driven by an aging community, driven by increasing expectations for more service. So there's this challenge, demands for more service and needing to look after what we've got. Base budget adjustments that have already been made, totaling $13 million over the last 5 years. So that helps deal with some of the challenges. It gives you a little bit of capacity to do new things. So I just want to leave you with a few thoughts, sort of final thoughts. This challenge of infrastructure funding, state of good repair, there are some likely challenges on the horizon. Who knows where the overall economy is going to go? Who knows where the province is going to go with funding for some of our programs and services? And we know that we've got lots of pressure for service expansions and increases, climate action, active transportation, affordable housing. So my encouragement as you staff turn this over to council for your final deliberations today is take a long-term view. Next 2021 budget will be upon you before you know it. You've got billions of dollars of infrastructure that needs looking after. And my encouragement is take a long-term view and try to find that right balance between looking after the infrastructure we've got at the same time as investing in new. So my final thoughts for that. So any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll turn it over back to Chair Strickland.
Any questions for Mr. Murray? Seeing none, okay.
Right.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate that. In terms of my opening comments, there's just a couple things that I'd like to point out, and that is, as per the history for the past 20 or so years, the committee chairs have gotten together and have taken a look at the budget and have made some recommendations, and all members of council and senior staff should have copies of those recommendations. And we had talked at this committee about a target. Well, going back several months ago, we had asked staff to come back with a target of 2.5% for direct regional programs. And you'll see, based on the committee chair's recommendations, that we pretty well achieved that, albeit with some additions and some subtractions to get us to a proposed tax rate increase of 3.84%. So what's going to happen today is Craig's going to go through his presentation, an overview of regional supported programs. We're also going to look at the issue papers. There's some base budget adjustments that Craig's going to recommend, so we'll deal with those. Then we'll deal with the issue papers. Then we'll deal with the committee chair's recommendations. And throughout that process, there'll be time for debate and deliberation. And then at the end of the meeting, we'll have our final budget resolution. Of course, we also have to approve the police budget. And I noticed the chief in the audience, and I'd like to say thanks to the chief and Chair Redmond and Councillors Kiefer and Shantz on the police board for their work in bringing down that tax rate impact to the 1.38% we're looking at today, compared to a higher number when the chief and his staff were here last time. So there's been a lot of work that's gone into the budget. Staff have worked really hard. The committee chairs and the regional chair and myself have had numerous discussions, probably starting before Christmas and continuing after Christmas to get us to where we are today. So I look forward to the discussion, and I look forward to having a budget resolved and approved by 6 o'clock or so this afternoon, and then further approved at council tonight. So with that, Mr. Dyer, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the 2020 Budget Day here at the Region of Waterloo. I'd like to start off my presentation today a little bit differently than the ones that we've done so far, and I want to take you through a handful of slides to just kind of as a reminder, as an update on how your regional tax dollars go to work in this community, and what the services, how the resulting services impact on the lives of the residents of Waterloo Region. And I'm going to do that in the form of a number of slides, again, that I'll generally walk through fairly quickly, but I'm going to start off with regional tax dollars save lives. We do that by responding to somewhere in the range of 60,000 paramedic services calls over the course of the year. We do that through public health programs, through the introduction of consumption treatment services sites, through immunizations, through food inspections, and a myriad of other public health programs. Your tax dollars help to provide housing and income support to those who need a hand up and who need it most. We do that through providing funding for over 10,000 housing units across the region, 2,700 of which we own and operate and manage as Waterloo Region Housing. And we do that by providing income support for over 9,000 families and individuals every month over the course of the year. Your tax dollars also help people to get to where they need to go through our network of Grand River Transit Services and the recently introduced ION. We have a network of over 700 kilometers of roads and numerous active transportation, cycling facilities, multi-use trails, and other infrastructure to help people get around this region, not to mention our international airport. Regional tax dollars help to support climate change initiatives. This received a lot of attention and focus through the recent strategic plan work that was conducted over the course of last year. And we do that through that network of active transportation infrastructure, multi-use trails, cycling facilities, through the recycling and waste reduction programs that we offer, all of which are geared towards protecting the water quality, our natural areas, and the agricultural areas within the region of Waterloo. Your regional tax dollars also look after seniors and children, and we do that by providing services to over 3,200 subsidized childcare spaces and over 12,000 children looked after over the course of the year, and through the operation of our 263-bed Sunnyside home, and through various other supportive housing facilities and community programs. Your regional tax dollars enrich lives, and we do that through our regional library system, through our cultural sites. The libraries over the course of the year will circulate somewhere in the 425,000 range of items. We'll have 115, 120,000 visitors at our cultural sites. And we have a public art program which this council supports as well. In addition, your regional tax dollars help to create jobs. That's done in collaboration with a variety of community partners through the supply of employment lands, by attracting businesses and investments, important investments to this community. And all that comes together to provide a quality of life that the residents of Waterloo Region enjoy and wish to maintain, and it's why we live here. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn our attention to the business of today, which is to approve the 2020 budget. We have a series of slides that, unlike previous presentations, which was more kind of information sharing, many of these slides are just designed to help us work through the day and get through the business that Regional Council and Budget Committee need to do over the course of the next hour or so. So first of all, in terms of the overall budget position, as indicated in our most recent staff report, currently sitting at an overall budget position of 3.9%. That reflects a number of base budget adjustments that are proposed through today's staff report. It takes into account recommended budget issue papers and reflects the most recent budget approval from the Waterloo Region Police Services Board, as Chair Strickland mentioned earlier. This slide, which I'll repeat again at the end, basically shows where the police budget was back in December when it was originally approved by the board, and the revisions that were made last week have brought the overall levy increase down to about 6.25%, and that has a tax rate impact of 1.38%, and that's part of what council will need to review today. So in terms of our order of business, just to help everyone work through the work for today. So first of all, we're going to talk a bit about the staff recommended budget adjustments. There's about a half dozen or so largely housekeeping adjustments that are recommended through the budget. Committee will need to approve the library budget. We'll go through at a high level some of the budget information papers that are included in today's package. Then we'll introduce the main budget motion, and at that point, we'll turn it back to Budget Committee to both review and approve, to the extent that you feel you should, the budget issue papers and any other adjustments to the budget. And then we'll bring the final motions forward as amended to approve the region's budget and capital program, user fee and charge bylaw, and the municipal budget regulation report, and to approve the Waterloo Region Police Services operating budget and capital program. So that's the sequence we're going to work through over the next little bit, and if there are no questions, I'll launch right into the first item. Okay, so first off, in today's report, in Appendix A in particular, we have listed and provided details in the body of the report of a number of proposed changes to the budget. Again, as I said earlier, a number of these are housekeeping in nature and include an increase of about $21,000 for the membership within FCM. We have some housekeeping adjustments to senior services compensation, which provides a reduction of about $83,000. Community Services Committee received a report last week to amend the budget with respect to Sunnyside Home for some additional funding that's been received that has no net levy impact, but should be approved by Budget Committee and Council to amend the budget. The levy for MPAC has been received, and it's about $17,000 lower than we had in the budget. We have a couple of recommendations, which I'll speak to a little bit more in just a minute, with respect to winter shelter programs. We're proposing, again, that there be no levy impact. And an adjustment to our overall tax write-offs budget based on our experience over the last 4 or 5 years. We think we can reduce that by about $100,000. Specifically with respect to winter shelter programs, 3 recommendations included in the report. One, would be to add $90,000 for the 8-month pilot through the Ray of Hope. This would address gaps in service in the daytime and weekends within downtown Kitchener. This would be cost shared with the City of Kitchener, and I understand on Monday night through the City of Kitchener's budget approval that the city's portion of this funding was approved. And then secondly, the One Roof initiative, which would add 25 winter overflow spaces specifically for youth in the community. That would be operated from January through April, and that's estimated to cost approximately $240,000. From a funding perspective, the recommendation here is to fund these items within the existing 2020 homelessness operating budget to the extent possible. It's not exactly clear to us at this point what the costs are going to be over the next few months. Staff are going to work to attempt as much as possible to manage these costs within the budget. If that's not possible, we would turn to the tax stabilization reserve only if required. And I think we would report back to council as the year progresses as to what the actual costs were for these two programs, how that fits in with the overall homelessness budget, and the extent to which the tax stabilization reserve is or isn't needed.
Okay, Mr. Dyer, we have a question. Councillor Ivanovic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it is on. And it's, I want to say that I'm certainly pleased to see both of these items here. I think they very much need to be here in order to tackle some of the challenges we're seeing in our community. I guess I'm just a little concerned that we're hoping to cover it all through the existing homelessness budgets and using tax stabilization reserve, because there are some other areas that I think we still need to grapple with. I mean, our shelter system right now is really designed to sort of handle a certain type of client. But we know that there are other citizens where the shelter system in its existing form isn't working, and we need to address some of those issues. And so I'm concerned that we're not setting any new dollars aside in this area when, in fact, there's going to be additional pressures even over and above these two. The City of Kitchener has set aside, as part of our work on affordable housing, money on a permanent basis in our operating budgets now, and has committed to the Ray of Hope funding for the coming 8-month period, and very appreciative of the fact that the region's being open to partnering on this. But I think it's only the beginning of the work that collectively we need to deal with. And I know Councillor Erb's been doing a lot of work in this area. I know that Cambridge is experiencing some real challenges, and so I'm concerned that we perhaps should be setting aside some additional dollars in this space.
Mr. Dyer, just further Councillor Ivanovic's comment. Tax Stabilization Reserve Fund, what's the balance in that fund right now?
Approximately $15 million at the end of last year, subject to some adjustments over the course of this year.
So, Councillor Ivanovic, I would suggest if they're making this allocation here, and maybe we can get a report in a month to see if it's adequate funding, and if we need to dip into the Tax Stabilization Reserve Fund, then we can allocate those funds as we go through, because I think 15 million will be enough to.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's no question that will get us through it. But where is a tax stabilization reserve in relation to our target for that reserve? Do we have minimum and maximum targets?
Through Mr. Chair, so we have a target balance which is $15 million. So we are basically right at our target right now. If I may, and I may look to Douglas and Ryan for some support here, I think the idea, so part of the reason for taking this approach is I think the uncertainty about what the costs will be over the first 4 months of this year, and the intent, I believe, would be for staff to report back with the results of how things have played out with respect to both of these programs. And I would say it might be a likely scenario that a budget issue paper would come forward seeking, I'd say, permanent funding as part of the 2021 budget.
Okay, and what you're also saying, if I understood correctly, is if other initiatives need to be looked at over the course of the year, there's lots of room in tax stabilization to assist with that.
I think that's a fair comment, and in terms of the context of the overall homelessness budget, the overall homelessness budget is in the range of $15 million as well. So in terms of our ability to accommodate these costs within the existing budget, that is possible, and we have the TSR as the fallback.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Galloway.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank staff. I think this is a good news story in terms of meeting the need and allocating the resources necessary and using the tax stabilization reserve fund as a backstop. That's one of its purposes, and we'll gain a lot of experience through this. And if other initiatives come along and can be funded from the tax stabilization fund, that's fine too. But we'll learn over the course of this winter how these programs go, and then we will deal with it on an annual basis, theoretically at least, in the next budget cycle. So I think this is a very good way to go. We're meeting the need. We're putting more resources into the winter shelter program, and I think this is a very prudent way to go forward on it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Erb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First question, the $240,000, that's not cost shared with any, that's 100% cost of the region?
That's correct.
Okay. Secondly, in reading the report, I understand that the barrier level has been lowered at One Roof for youth, and I'm not sure if we're getting into more of away from the budget here, but are we going to be able to accommodate more youth at One Roof with the barriers being lowered than what we have in the past? Because that seemed to be part of the problem with the overnight warming center and some of the issues associated.
Douglas, care to respond to that?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. We believe that we can accommodate more youth at One Roof. Part of the issue has been the restrictions that agencies have placed on a number of clients over the past. What staff has done is worked with them to reduce the level of restriction that they feel is necessary and accommodate more youth as a result.
Thank you, because I think that's been a concern for many of us, and it's good to hear that direction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. No further questions. Craig?
The remaining two, again, I'll refer to them as housekeeping adjustments, reflect our recent review of non-tax revenues. You may recall when we Budget Committee last met back in December, we made a commitment to review our non-tax revenues and our preliminary, our preliminary look at where we ended up after a full year in 2019. And so as a result of that review, I think in most cases, what we've budgeted for in 2020, I think is quite appropriate with respect to, our experience in 2019. There are two areas where we are recommending minor adjustments to the budgets. They're highlighted here on slide 42. And the two proposed adjustments are to increase the estimate for POA revenues by $50,000 and to increase the estimate of housing services rent by $125,000. And just as a quick follow-up to the discussion we had back in December with respect to automated speed enforcement, this is more of a reminder for Budget Committee that the costs and revenues related to automated speed enforcement have not been included in the 2020 budget. and to explain why. We did have some of this discussion last time, but just to make sure that we close the loop on it, we have yet to, formally establish the number of locations. There's some uncertainty about the start date, but we do expect it to be subject to council approval. It would be later this year. We are anticipating a lag between the start date and the receipt of any fine revenue. We understand that there are requirements to post locations in advance of cameras being activated, and our experience with red light cameras would suggest that early charges are likely to be challenged. So the staff position on this matter is that we're going to report back to council, I think, relatively soon, certainly in the next couple of months, as our recommendations around start date, locations, and with a full financial analysis, both capital and operating, expenditure and revenue, as soon as that becomes clear and subject to direction from council, then we would implement a program and budget accordingly in 2021.
Okay, we have a question on that. Councillor Ivanovic?
Okay, so this is something that we dealt with last week at committee. And yes, the report will be coming back as you noted. So similar to the issue of additional initiatives around homelessness and so on, if we were to proceed with this in 2020, we would be funding both any capital and any operating out of our reserves, particularly for the capital. The operating would, hopefully some of it would be covered by ticket revenues, but if not, then that would come out of reserves for this initial year as well, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that's an option. I have to admit, I certainly haven't had a chance yet to fully assess the need on both the capital and the operating side. But once we get a clear idea of what those costs are, we may have a couple of options with respect to capital funding. Suspect there's not going to be very many. And once we get a sense of what ongoing operating costs and revenues look like, we'd be in a position to make a recommendation to council as to how to deal with any in-year costs in 2020 and then what the longer-term prospect looks like. But certainly, the short answer, tax stabilization reserve is one of the options that we would consider.
Okay, because I guess where I don't want to be, because I know this is a priority for those of us coming from the municipalities, and it's no doubt a priority for many of us around here. I just don't want to see us be in a situation where, we're saying we don't have the funding in 2020 and we can't move on this till 2021, because other cities are already doing it, and the expectation from our residents is, why haven't you done it already? So we need to sort of play some catch up here, and as long as that there are mechanisms in place that will allow for it, I'm good with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Galloway?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was concerned about why we weren't budgeting for some additional revenue, and I'm willing to accept the reasons why staff are recommending nothing for this particular year for automated speed enforcement. And I do want to say, though, that whether it's speed enforcement or traffic enforcement generally, these are somewhat barriers, or they have implications in terms of our active transportation goals as well. When people are speeding, of course, people who are walking and people who are cycling feel less safe. So whether it's automated speed enforcement or it's traffic enforcement in a broader perspective, I think we need to look at that. I have discussed very preliminarily with the chief about a possible effort to expand the overall traffic enforcement process in the community with that particular view to make our streets safer for active transportation. So I look forward to our opportunities related to automated speed enforcement, but it's larger than that as well, of course. And of course, there's revenues associated with this, which of course we can put to good use for other purposes, of course.
Okay, is there a question there? Oh, okay. Mr. Dyer?
So at this, point, Mr. Chair, I will turn things back to you to consider agenda item number 4 on today's Budget Committee agenda, which is a recommendation to amend the preliminary 2020 tax-supported operating budget as set out in Appendix A to the report. And granted, the font is a little bit small here, but we thought we would just list everything that's included in Appendix A, which is basically all of the items that I've just gone through. And so we would look to you to consider this recommendation at this point.
So in our committee agenda for today, what page is that on, Mr. Dyer?
Page 15 of today's agenda.
15. And that corresponds with the committee chair's report that we circulated, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So just reviewing that there. Okay, so just to kind of play along here with the playbook. So we approve page 15 there, and you look at the committee chair's report. It's basically those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items right at the top called base budget adjustments. So moved by Councillor Benovic, seconded by Councillor Rentz. Any discussion? All those in favor? It's carried. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dyer.
Thank you. So next up we have the library budget approval. Slide 47 of today's presentation shows the budget that was approved by the library board back in December. The library budget is just over $3 million. Represents a 2.1% increase over the levy from last year. And as I believe Council is aware, the cost of library services is area rated on a uniform basis across the 4 townships. We have on today's agenda, agenda item number 5. On the bottom of page, you can see the recommendation at the bottom of page 1 of the agenda. And this was the resolution that was approved by Library Board, referred to Budget Committee, and it would be appropriate for Budget Committee to now take whatever action it deems appropriate with respect to this recommendation.
Okay, we have a mover or seconder for that? Councillor Foxton, Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you, Mr. Dyer.
Thank you. Just a brief, so just a couple of quick updates here. We're going to go quickly through issue papers, a little bit about capital, a little bit about info papers and then public engagement, and then turn it back over to you for further deliberations. From an issue paper perspective, we've tried to summarize on this page everything at the top leading up to the blue shaded line are the recommended issue papers. As you know, there's a very small list this year. Staff have recommended option 1 from paramedic services, which is the 2 12-hour ambulances and associated staffing resources. And on the GRT side, we're recommending bundle 1, which is an additional 15,000 service hours. The 3 items that are below, I'll call it below the line, right down at the bottom, are the additional items that are currently not in the budget position that I referred to earlier. From an overall impact right now, sitting at just over $2 million in 2020, and if approved as indicated, there would be an $857,000 annualization impact heading into 2021. Just a brief summary on GRT service expansion. This was a repeat of a slide we showed last time, which shows the investment in additional service hours going back to 2018. And as a reminder, included in the base budget before you today is bundle 2 from last year. So this was 10,000 service hours that council approved to come into effect on April 1st of 2020. Bundle 1 from this year is another 15,000 hours that would come into effect on September 1st, and then bundles 2 and 3 are there for council's consideration. From a costing perspective, in terms of the service, bundle 1, 15,000 hours mainly in Cambridge, bundle 2, another 15,000 hours for various improvements, frequency improvements relating to the implementation of ION, and bundle 3, an additional 5,000 hours, again, mainly focusing on service in Cambridge. The costing is set out here on slide 52. It's about $1 million for each of bundles 1 and 2 in 2020, with an annualized cost of $1.2 million for each. Just a brief summary on the capital program. We went through this in a fair bit of detail last time, so I won't spend too much time on it, but as a reminder, $3.5 billion capital program over the next 10 years with significant capital investments in roads rehabilitation, in active transportation, public transit facilities, waste and paramedic services. As far as 2020 goes, it's about a $312 million program, about 75%, about 3/4 of overall planned capital spending on the tax-supported side in 2020 would be between roads and public transit. Of course, public transit significantly impacted by the start of the Northfield operations and bus storage facility. Two particular items, just as reminders, the two main things we're watching on the capital side. Going back to Mr. Murray's comments at the start, two big challenges on capital. One is asset renewal on existing assets, and one is new infrastructure required to service growth. And on the asset renewal side, we're looking at making progress with respect to funding for Waterloo Region Housing, for waste management capital, and on the facility side, where a majority of the costs, particularly with respect to waste management and facilities, continue to be debt financed. We have a funding gap that's estimated in the $44 million range. We're looking to refine that number this year as we present an update to our asset management plan. But that's one of our key items on the capital side. And the other one, which we talked about at some detail through the user rate budgets, is the growth-related financing risk. And this is where we're issuing debt that will recover from future development charges. And our risks, of course, are that we have potentially an over-reliance in the long term on that debt, leading to an unsustainable level of debt servicing costs. And we showed this chart, which showed the level of debt servicing costs relative to development charge collections, high on wastewater because of debt that we've issued over the last few years, and we'll keep a very close watch on the water and the transportation numbers and report back to council as required. Turning our attention to budget information papers, there's 3 of them on the agenda today. One is Councillor Requests, one is user fees and charges, and one is the required municipal budget regulation report. Focusing on the Councillor Requests, we've provided information coming out of the last meeting with respect to active transportation, some data with respect to transit services, and we've provided some updates on some of the work that we're doing and the asset renewal work within our regional facilities. So as a reminder, from an active transportation perspective, we have about $89 million of active transportation work planned over the next 10 years. With a number of projects that would proceed in 2020. And this is consistent with the numbers that were put forward as part of the most recent Transportation Master Plan update. We've already talked about investment in transit services, but from a climate action perspective, we continue to put significant resources and effort into expanding our transit service, as indicated here with the service hours being added over the last 3 or 4 years. And in addition, staff are going to be reporting back in 2020 with respect to initiatives relating to the potential use of electric buses and shorter or smaller buses as well. From a facilities perspective, we have a number of projects included in 2020 through our Energy Conservation Office, including LED lighting projects, which we're at the tail end now of completing those works, approximately $1 million, and about $250,000 for other energy-related pilot projects and studies. And that includes work at Waterloo Region Housing sites, some work at Sunnyside, and at various police facilities as well. And just a quick reminder with respect to public engagement, we had a report before the Administration and Finance Committee last week summarizing the public engagement results. We were pleased with the response rate, up 14% over last year. And we've had a steady increase in responses since we initiated this in 2018. Importantly, I think respondents were generally supportive of increasing taxes enough to expand or improve taxes at 64%. And in terms of what's new and what's different, what was similar to last year was, again, we saw continued strong support for service expansion, for staffing at Sunnyside, for the ambulance service, continued investment in housing services, including the shelter system, and the number of respondents in favor of increasing taxes stayed relatively the same. What was new and different, so we saw an increased level of support for transit service expansion and some new themes that were identified through the open-ended question, which included opportunities to review police services expenditures and opportunities for public input through the police budget. We had strong support for maintaining the level of funding for discretionary benefits, which was an item that was raised through the service review. And while support for active transportation continues, a number of respondents stated their opposition to active transportation facilities, and particularly the on-road cycling lane. So that was a little bit different from what we had seen the year before. We hope that report and the outcome of that process was helpful for committee in its deliberations on the budget. And that brings us back to the overall budget, our current position. And the next order of business then would be the introduction of the main budget motion, which is item number 7 on page 2 of today's agenda. And there's 4 components to this agenda, to this item. So one is to approve the 2020 tax-supported operating budget for regional services excluding police, approve the capital budget and forecast, put a new user fee bylaw in place, and adopt the budget information paper relating to the municipal budget regulation, which is a requirement of the Municipal Act. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll leave that to you for the introduction of the motion, and then I think next steps would be reviewing budget issue papers and any other adjustments the committee wishes to make.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Dyer. So if we put in place the recommended number of $388,637,926, that would represent a 2.15% tax increase for region for now.
That's correct.
And so we want to get this motion on the floor, and then we'll amend it as per the report in front of us and subject to other inputs from council. So we'll have a mover, Councillor Foxton, Councillor Jowett. All those in favor? Oh, we're not going to vote on it.
Jump the gun.
That would be it, 2.15, there we go. But no, we have to now look at the budget issue papers. I'd like to also point out, I was remiss in my opening remarks, in terms of the councillors, the chair's report, you'll notice on there we've identified in the right-hand column CA. It's not for California as much as we all would like to be in California right now, but that's climate action. So we have heard a lot in our committee meetings and in the public and in the media and in various circles about how important we have declared a climate action emergency. So the committee chairs have decided that we should identify climate action items within our proposed increased spending for next year, for this year in the 2020 budget. And also you'll see at the bottom a summary of all of the expenses that we have allocated as a percentage of our overall levy to climate action in 2020. And this was an idea that was put forward by Councillor Galloway, and I'll let him speak more to that and also introduce the first budget issue papers. Councillor Galloway.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just a little bit further to your comments. So I think it's important for us to consider, first of all, as Councillor Strickland has said, we've declared a climate emergency. So obviously that really compels us to some form of action. And here we are at the budget process and a great opportunity to show some positive impacts that we want to make on our climate emergency. I would remind you also that our new strategic plan, just recently amended, is very significant in terms of active transportation and climate action. as high priorities, and in addition to affordable housing particularly, but in regards to climate action and active transportation. And I also would point out, as Mr. Dyer has recently, that the public engagement process that we had with our community also identified climate action as, and transit specifically, as a high priority. So with all that behind us, we thought that we would like to at least categorize those things that deal with climate action in a category, and we chose to identify 6 items or 5 items that are transit initiatives, transit issue papers that we are proposing for approval today as climate action. It's not exclusive what we're doing in climate action. Of course, Mr. Dyer has indicated other things that we were doing in terms of cogeneration, in terms of looking at electric vehicles and a whole variety of other initiatives, active transportation initiatives, a very significant amount of money going into active transportation in our capital budget. But for the purposes of this budget today, we are just kind of carving off those transit-related issue papers that we are going to denote as climate action. So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to amend the base budget by adding issue paper on Route 77, the Wilmot Town Service, for $59,000.
Do you want to do all 3 at once?
Okay, and then you can take comments
Yeah.
on them. Okay. So I'll move the Route 77. I'll move the implementation of the Mobility Plus 5-year business plan for $144,000 and implementation of the GRT business plan bundle 1, additional 15,000 hours for $1,017,000.
Okay, so we have a second for that. Councillor Clark. Is there any discussion? Comments on that? Okay, all those in favor? All right, that's carried. Thank you very much. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to break these down rather than do them all at once because they are very distinct papers. For starters, the Waterloo Region Housing Master Plan. This was something that we've spent a couple of years working on, and I think given the discussion that we've had even tonight about the importance of affordable housing, the increasing importance, this is something that's really important for us to move forward on. This is a way that we can do much more than our limited federal and provincial funding allows us to do, and that we are bringing forward some of our own assets and developing those. So I would like to move the Waterloo Region Housing Master Plan be adopted.
So similarly, there's 4 related to community services there. Do you want to take them all at once, or do we want to?
Fine.
I think people are nodding.
Sure, okay.
Councillor Clark, so if you can speak to
Senior
each of them.
services, personal support workers, we know that we are seeing increasing needs in the individuals that we're serving in our programming, and we are moving forward with some very exciting best practices to improve the quality of life of the people we serve there. However, we do require additional PSWs in order to deliver those services. So that's also something that I'm recommending. With regards to public health, substance use, and harm reduction, we have identified this as a crisis and an urgent need in our community. And with regards to paramedic services master plan implementation, this is the bundle that has been recommended by staff. I would simply note too that the number of ambulances is scalable, so we do have the ability at some later point to add to that if we find that that's necessary.
Okay, so moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Lawrence. Any discussion? All those in favor? All right, that's carried. Thank you very much. So we have the running total in front of us, so we're at 2.52%. If the calculator and the formulas are all correct for direct regional programs. Cheryl and Chris are looking at each other, they're nodding, okay, we're good. All right, so next we'll go to some additional adjustments as proposed by the committee chairs. And we'll start off with Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We can take the next two together, or we can take them one at a time, whatever you wish. But I would like to move an amendment to the motion, the budget motion, the base budget motion, that we implement Bundle 2 and Bundle 3, if you want to take them together. These are additions to hours of service that have a fairly significant emphasis on Cambridge, but also have a fairly significant emphasis on frequency. And as we know, frequency is important to people who are making decisions on alternate ways of transportation. So these were not originally recommended for the purposes that staff were, required to consider when they were given that target, but we feel that these should be added to the budget.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Kiefer? I would just like to add, in terms of context, and I appreciate staff to getting to our original target of 2.58 and only recommending Bundle 1. But as we went through our discussions as committee chairs and in conversation with transit staff, I think it's important to recognize that our business plan over the next 3 years has an additional 35,000 hours in it in each year. So if we were to reduce it this year, we still would need to catch up in future years. And so we felt that it was important to put these two bundles back in to the budget to help implement our business plan and gain the ridership that we need to gain and that we're projected to gain over the next couple of years. And as we move into the next recommendations after this one, we also felt we needed to find a way to pay for it rather than just increasing taxes. So they're completely related. Councillor Redmond, Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Strickland. And just on balance, as we look at phase 2 of the LRT, there was a discussion about creating that ridership and those numbers. So it was really important, I think, that we looked at a bigger picture. This really wasn't just a one-off. This was recognizing the connectivity between this bus infusion of additional routes in Cambridge and how that might impact as we went forward with the business case for phase 2.
Okay, Councillor Vanovic.
Thank you very much, and I certainly am pleased to see that the chairs have recommended the bundles be added in. Certainly, I was looking to do that today as the budget discussion went on. I think if we're going to be, true to the master plan that we created, and particularly in its early phases, it's imperative that we make these investments. The community has identified them as a priority. I think we know, as Chair Redmond just indicated, I mean, our future business plan is going to rely on additional hours, but we also need to keep in mind that we actually benefit from increased ridership, because as that ridership goes up, we're going to get additional infrastructure dollars through the federal government in that regard. And so it's almost like a catch-22 that if we don't do it, we're not going to see those dollars. And so I think that becomes important as well for the portion of the programs that are ridership related. So I will be supporting these proposed changes.
Okay, thank you. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? All right, that's carried. Thank you very much. Councillor Galloway, maybe we can take the next two together as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the next item is to increase the fare revenue budget for Grand River Transit by $500,000. And if you remember the slide that Mr. Dyer had showed on fare revenue for Grand River Transit, there is already a fairly significant increase, but of course that's predicated largely on our experience this past year and projecting that into 2020. But our thoughts were to add another $500,000, primarily because of the new bundles that we are putting into the budget now that they've been approved. that we will see additional revenue that staff did not anticipate because their estimations did not include bundles 2 and 3.
Okay, so that's been moved by Councillor Galloway, a seconder. Councillor McGarry, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? That's carried.
And then
Okay.
the last item, Mr. Chair, is...
Sorry, Councillor Galloway, I sent you a note. You're obviously really paying attention to the task before us, not looking at your BlackBerry, but
We're not allowed to
Chair Redmond's going to deal with this.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Strickland. I think it's also important to acknowledge the participation of the Vice Chair, Finance and Admin, Councillor Jowett, who was also part of this whole process. The reduction to the capital asset renewal funding strategy by $750,000 is something that got an awful lot of discussion, recognizing that it would be prudent to put the entire amount in that the staff had recommended, but we think at this juncture that this provides some balance on a go-forward basis. And I would just say to staff that it could have been worse. I really argued for just $750,000. So recognizing that this does kick some future questions in funding down the road, I would move that we reduce our capital asset renewable funding by $750,000 this year.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Armstrong? Okay, any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, a couple opposed, so noted, thank you. Okay, so those are the committee chairs' recommendations. Did we do the fourth one? No. The phase-in? Yeah, we did both. I asked to do both. I asked to do the fair revenue adjustment and the phase-in of the bus replacement. You didn't speak to it, but... I didn't speak to that. That's why I... Yeah. All right. Okay. Okay, so that's the budget as amended. Are there any other proposed amendments from committee? Okay, seeing none, then I think it would be in order for us to approve that motion as amended. Correct, Mr. Dyer?
Yes, and so there's 3 amendments that should be made to the main budget motion. I'll just walk through each of them right now. So the first is...
And you'll give us the right number to go in there, right?
I'll give you the correct number, yes.
Right.
So the number we're going to put into the blank space up here is $390,348,326.
Which represents a 2.46% increase for regional programs.
That will recommend, yes, that's correct.
Okay?
Yep. With the change made to the asset renewal funding, there's a related change on the capital side that we need to make, and so the recommendation would read like this. It's not up on the screen, but it would read that the Regional Municipality of Waterloo amend the 2020 to 2029 tax-supported capital program by increasing the amount of tax-supported debenture financing by $7.5 million and by reducing the amount of tax-supported reserve funding by $7.5 million. And that's just reflecting the fact that when the funding strategy was put together for the capital program, it was on the assumption that the funding levels would be approved as presented in the budget, with $750 coming out. From a 10-year perspective, it's 10 years at that. So we just need to swap out $7.5 million of reserve funding with debt financing. Okay. So that would be an amendment to the main budget motion. And then the final amendment would be in the bottom recommendation on page 76 here on the screen, where it says, as amended by Budget Committee on December 11th, 2019, we would insert and January 22nd, 2020. And those would be the changes.
So before we put that main budget as amended and is articulated with those additional amendments by Mr. Dyer, we have a question or a comment. Councillor Harris?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to know if there's a net FTE calculation add to this year's regional budget, if you happen to know that number.
Just bear with me for 1 minute.
I haven't seen it.
If I may, Mr. Chair, if it's acceptable, if we could get that information back to committee, we just have to make some calculations to reflect the issue papers that were added in today. But it's an easy calculation to do, and we'll send it around.
Councillor Harris?
I guess just in addition to that, but before we proceed, because the next is the vote, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, obviously, we've all been collecting feedback from our constituents, and they're following, obviously, this budget process in addition to other local communities closely to some degree. And, you know, while, 2.46 is clearly in above to the inflation number, obviously the police budget is one that this council has particular limited impact on. We hope that I think they've heard the message loud and clear for perhaps next year to come back with, as good of number as they possibly can. I will say that, the number is high in terms of my opinion, but there are obviously very important social services that our community relies on and expects, and investments that we're making in infrastructure at a time, too, that we've not seen particularly, the downloads or increased costs from the provincial level that we had thought we were going to see. We have undertaken the KPMG audit that we have unfortunately not been able to incorporate into this particular budget, but for good reasons. And I hope that this particular council will strive to work with the findings of that audit and seriously consider adopting some of those mechanisms or measures within that audit to help reduce the number that we may be faced with next year, knowing that there will likely be, again, increased investments that we will require, but perhaps cost pressures from other levels of government that we thought we would see this particular year that we haven't. So that's my 2 cents ahead of the vote, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
2.46.
Thanks very much, Councillor Harris, and I think we're all very much aware of potential headwinds with respect to funding changes from the provincial government that will impact 2021. And I think that we're positioning ourselves through the service review, as you rightly point out. And if you recall, we've also put into the service review some firm deadlines for staff to come back with reports and the hiring of consultants. So I think, and I very much anticipate that we'll be spending a considerable amount of time on looking at some of those very big issues on the service review before we go into the 2021 budget. Okay, there's no other speakers. We have the main budget amendment. Do you have the FT number, Craig?
Yes, I do. So the total increase in FTEs is just over 41, with 28 in transit, 10 in paramedic services, and the balance in through the other issue papers.
28 in transit and 10.
10 in paramedic services, and a small number through the remaining issue papers.
Yeah. Okay, well, those are priority areas. Okay. All right, thank you. We're ready for the question. All right, so all those in favor of the main budget as amended? Anyone opposed? That is carried unanimously. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Dyer, we got a couple other things to do.
We have one other thing to do, which is the approval of the 2020 Waterloo Regional Police Service Budget. This is a repeat of the slide from earlier. Overall expenditures just under 200 million, tax rate impact of 1.38%. There are two recommendations included on pages 2 and 3 of today's agenda. One is to approve the 2020 operating budget, and the other to approve the 2020 tax-supported capital budget and tax-supported capital budget forecast.
Okay, so we have a mover and seconder for that. Councillor Foxton, Councillor Jowett. We got a couple speakers. Chair Redmond.
So I'm assuming that the police budget has been, that was what the mover and seconder was for?
Yes.
Okay, I would just like to commend Chief Brian Larkin, who has joined us, as well as my colleagues, Councillors Shantz and Kiefer. Police board worked really hard. I think this council has seen evidence that we went back to the drawing board, tried to be creative, found ways that we could economize in so many ways. This year was a perfect storm for the police budget, and yet we managed to continue to bring that impact down on the tax levy. So there is a great big thank you that needs to go out to Kirsten Hand and the finance people at Waterloo Regional Police Services, the chief for his leadership, as well as the CFO for the region, as well as Mike Murray. I know everybody was doing their very best to sort of squeeze all of the juice out of the lemon, and we managed to. So it was a group effort, very well done, and I thank my colleagues who are here and the other ones on the police board for really taking a hard look at how we could economize.
Okay, thank you, Chair Redmond. Councillor Vanovic?
Thank you, and I do have a question for the chief, and I guess I'll preface my question with some comments while he walks down. I want to thank the chief and the board for the work that they did as well in getting the budget down. You know, in a year where we have a number of competing pressures overall, that's certainly a good thing. But I also know that you know, I continue to hear, as others do, around needs, you know, additional policing needs in our community, whether it's traffic enforcement, whether it's other issues in different parts of the city and so on. And so I just want to be sure that as you sort of work to get the budget down, that it doesn't jeopardize the opportunity for you and the board to have the necessary maneuverability to address some of the pressures that you know, we're feeling in the cities,
So just,
and or the townships.
just before the chief responds, I just want to make a comment that it's highly unusual at this juncture of the budget process to direct a question to the chief of police when it's in our hands. We had that opportunity a couple weeks ago. But I will allow it, but it is highly unusual when the motion's on the floor and in council's hands, but I will allow the question. So Chief?
I don't know how we've asked other staff questions, so this shouldn't be any different.
It's highly unusual, Councillor Ranovic. But Chief, you're the police chief. You can handle this situation.
It's a pretty straightforward question.
Thanks, Chair Strickland, and through you to Mayor Verbanovic. Thank you for the question. And if I've summarized it correctly, the most recent recommendation to reposition and realign our budget was a reduction or a recommendation to the Police Services Board on January 15th of $650,000. And I can take you through the three-phased item. In short, the answer is no, it does not impact our operational ability to deliver frontline policing services adequately and effectively. In fact, I would like to reiterate that we will be adding 13 new frontline staff from within our budget, and so we were able to find efficiencies through continuous improvement to augment our frontline staffing without requesting the board and or council for additional monies. The $650,000 reduction, one is as a result of a flow-through provincial funding of cannabis monies, $350,000 that the police service were able to work with the Regional Waterloo Finance Department on a one-time flow-through. Another $100,000 was found through modifying our contributions to a WSIB reserve over a 3-year phased-in approach. That resulted in $100,000, and through working with our human resources branch, our finance branch around staff planning and staff vacancy, we were able to find another $200,000 in staff vacancies for a total of $650,000, which was allowed us to reposition our budget based on feedback from the board and from regional council and our organizational commitment to the larger success of the community and the larger success of the regional budget. We were able to reduce it from 1.5 to 1.38. But I want to be very clear that those monies do not impact frontline policing or other investigative strategies within our organization. And in fact, the repositioning of those monies to the board was at my recommendation as the chief.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that information, and thanks for the good work that you've done. Hearing that we've got those 13 additional positions is great news, and that you're able to do it within your existing budget. And I from the residents I hear anyway, I want to just make sure that as we go forward, we continue to have the resources necessary to see our police service have the budget needed to serve our community. So thanks for the great job you do.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Councillor Ranovic. Thanks, Chief. Thanks for being here today. And thanks for that response. Okay, so we're ready for the question with respect to police budget. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. So that's carried unanimously. And I think that's it, Mr. Dyer.
It is, Mr. Chair. If I could have 30 seconds of committee's time.
Sure. One question first, though.
Certainly.
So we're at 3.84, and that represents how much for the average taxpayer?
$79.
79 bucks. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Dyer, floor is yours.
Yep. So thank you. So I just wanted to take this moment to express my thanks to staff at the region for all of their efforts in putting this budget together. This was an exercise that started probably just after the last budget was approved. And with guidance of Mr. Murray and my colleagues around the department head table, and the senior management staff who are present here today from multiple departments. Thanks to all of them, but in particular to the finance team, Cheryl, Kathy, Chris, Brad, Emily, and numerous other individuals who are not here today put in a huge amount of effort to make this work on an annual basis. And it's one of my few opportunities to express my thanks to them publicly. So thank you for the time to be able to do that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dyer. I'd like to express my thanks on behalf of committee to you and your staff as well. And it was right up until noon today that we were finalizing all this process and going back and forth and emails in the middle of the night and at 7 in the morning. So I really appreciate the timeliness in which you responded to our inquiries and the spirit in which we were able to work through this together. So thank you to you and staff as well. Councillor Requests.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank you for once again navigating us through this myriad of numbers and figures and coming forward today with something, a recommendation that we all can support. As one of the lowest paid employees in the region, I think you've done yeoman's work. And I think we should remind people that. But sincerely, once again, you've made what is a very complicated process very easy for us to understand. And I just want to thank you on behalf of Council.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Requests. It was a real team effort. Really appreciate that. Thanks. Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Councillor Strickland. I too would like to add my voice to thanks to you and the entire team of chairs and Vice Chair Jowett for going through this debate. And it was a lot of debate. It was a lot of sort of toing and froing and very much informed by Mr. Dyer. I guess I would just like to point two things out, not to trivialize a very important part in the calendar of the region, but this will be Mr. Murray's last budget. And I think that it's the best budget, Craig, that you've ever presented because it had way more pictures than numbers. So good on you.
Okay, great. All right, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
If I may, just, Mr. Chair?
Councillor.
Sorry, I have to correct myself.
Yeah.
79. It's not $79. It's $78. and that's number one.
To count on the treasurer for that.
Yes, absolutely. And in my thanks, I left out Shauna Calder, who's sitting right in front of me here in my thanks, so I wanted to include her as well. Thank you.
Thanks. So moved and seconded, motion to adjourn. All those in favor? That's carried. We're adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll finalize the approval at the council tonight. Thanks.